Even though the audience, the television audience for this convention thus far has not been particularly large by modern standards, one might expect that people will tune in tonight. He is best known for having written a well-received autobiography, which he started while he was at Yale Law School.
Trump's new running mate is known for his autobiography and Marine Corps service. Billionaire Peter Thiel helped him secure jobs and funded his Senate campaign, leading to Trump's endorsement and a Senate seat. Vance's controversial stance on making abortion illegal nationally and his far-right views suggest confidence in winning the election without appealing to a broader audience. Meanwhile, Democrats are reportedly worried about their chances and considering major changes.
Mr. Vance also served for 6 months in Iraq as a public affairs unit officer in the Marine Corps. Served in a public affairs unit in the Marine Corps. Yes, even the Marines do have public relations. They're great at it, in fact. But that is the type of unit, a public affairs unit, that he was in when he was in Iraq. After he did his law degree, again at Yale, he became a protege of a very right-wing billionaire who you might remember from the first Republican National Convention that nominated Donald Trump for president. He had a primetime speaking slot. He got J.D. Vance a job at a biotech company in San Francisco that J.D. Vance was hired, quote, as a favor to Peter, meaning as a favor to Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel then got J.D. Vance a second job, should hire J.D. Vance. See, this is why these guys are so against any kind of affirmative action, because clearly they got where they are in this life out of sheer merit, as represented by having your billionaire friend call people and tell them to hire you, even though they're not sure why they're supposed to be hiring you. After Mr. Vance washed out of the second job that Peter Thiel gave him, Mr. Vance then got another job at a different venture capital firm with another tech billionaire, with Steve Case, who founded AOL. How did that one work out? Mr. Case is on the record saying, quote, he wasn't really working very much. Nevertheless, Mr. Vance then was able to go and start another venture capital firm with, surprise, yet more help from Peter Thiel. Lord of the Rings is a sort of favorite cosmos for naming things and cultural references. Peter Thiel names all these things after Tolkien figures and places, like his company Palantir, for example. Like his mentor, like Peter Thiel, who had given him all his jobs in the world, Mr. Vance also, when he founded his own venture capital firm with help from Peter Thiel, apparently that word has something to do with elves and rings from the Lord of the Rings series. I don't know. In his new firm, Mr. Vance made one notable investment in one Kentucky company. That Kentucky company went public and then promptly went bankrupt. Does that sound like the rocket fuel trajectory of a person on a fast track to be nominated as the vice presidential nominee of the Republican Party of the United States before he turns 40? No, it does not. Writing a memoir and otherwise being Peter Thiel's intern is not usually the way you get to be a vice presidential nominee. It's not usually the way you get to be a United States senator either. But it is the way you get to be a U.S. senator if you're J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance's campaign for the U.S. Senate was the first time he ever ran for anything. His campaign was substantially, emphasis on substantially, funded by Peter Thiel, who dumped $15 million into a super PAC that supported J.D. Vance's run for Senate. That super PAC then further effectively took over the operation of the campaign and ran most of it for Mr. Vance. And after Peter Thiel personally took J.D. Vance to meet Donald Trump, literally, Peter Thiel physically walked him into the meeting and presented him to Trump. That's how he won the Republican primary. He then vastly underperformed other Ohio Republican candidates on the general election ballot in 2022, but he did win, which is how he got into the United States Senate a grand total of a year and a half ago. And that's how he got to be the vice presidential nominee of the Republican Party right now. As internships go, that's a really good internship. The choice of J.D. Vance to be Donald Trump's running mate is reportedly a decision that was only made at the very last minute, like the day before it was announced. You do not choose a person like Mr. Vance because you think you need help winning the election. If you're trying to make up for some, soft spots, some weaknesses in the Republican Party's electoral prospects, you do not, for example, choose a vice presidential running mate who is on the record, on tape, taking this position.
I certainly would like abortion to be illegal nationally.
I certainly would like abortion to be illegal nationally. 2022 podcast interview, First Unearthed by CNN Today, in which J.D. Vance says, I certainly would like abortion to be illegal nationally. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump, whatever you think about his politics and his political instincts, he's been very open about the fact that he sees the Republican Party's strong stance against abortion, particularly a strong stance for a national abortion ban, as an electoral loser. Even though Mr. Trump is the one who orchestrated the overturning of Roe versus Wade and therefore the Republican abortion bans all over the country, Trump has admitted that strongly restrictive stances on abortion, particularly a nationally restrictive stance on abortion, will cost the Republicans elections they could otherwise win.
J.D. Vance addressed criticism about being too serious, stating he enjoys giving speeches, but is angry about Kamala Harris's impact on the country, particularly at the southern border. He expressed frustration over high costs for groceries and housing, and praised Trump's presidency for rising wages. Vance emphasized the need to increase paychecks, lower prices, and unleash American energy and farming. Vance also highlighted the importance of public safety and common sense policies, noting that communities of color benefit most when crime is controlled and police are supported.
Sir.
Last night, Governor Walz suggested that because of your Ivy League education and your Silicon backing your political career, that you yourself are part of the elite. What are your first impressions of them trying to frame you this way to the American public?
Well, look, I came from a family where nobody in my family had ever gone to law school. I grew up in a poor family. The fact that Tim Walz wants to turn it into a bad thing, that I actually worked myself through college, through law school, and made something myself, to me, that's the American dream. And if Tim Walz wants to insult it, I think that's frankly pretty bizarre. Now, look, what really bothers me about Tim Walz, it's not when Tim Walz was asked by his country to go to Iraq, you know what he did? He dropped out of the Army and allowed his unit to go without him, a fact that he's been criticized for aggressively by a lot of the people that he served with. I think it's shameful to prepare your unit to go to Iraq, to make a promise that you're going to follow through, and then to drop out right before you actually have to go. I also think it's dishonest. Something, again, if you guys ever get an opportunity to ask Tim Walz or Kamala Harris some questions, he made this interesting comment. Well, I wonder, Tim Walz, when were you ever in war? What was this weapon that you carried into war, given that you abandoned your unit right before they went to Iraq, and he has not spent a day in a combat zone? What bothers me about Tim Walz is the stolen valor garbage. Do not pretend to be something that you're not. And if he wants to criticize me for getting an Ivy League education, I'm proud of the fact that my mamaw supported me, that I was able to make something of myself. I'd be ashamed if I was him and I lied about my military service like he did. Sir. Could you speak a little louder? Sorry.
Will Jones from Local 4. I want to talk a little bit about race. I was at the National Association of Black Journalists conference last week where President Trump made some attacks on Vice President Harris's biracial heritage. You're married to an Indian American woman. You have biracial children. How do you explain his attacks, and what is your reaction to his attacks as a father of biracial children?
Yes, sir. So I am the father of biracial children. Actually, my wife is here today, though my kids are back home with my aunt today. What I took it as was an attack on Kamala Harris being a chameleon. She pretends to be one thing when she's in front of one audience. She pretends to be something else when she's in front of another audience. Now, she has been able to hide this a little bit because for the past couple of weeks, she only speaks in front of a teleprompter. She never gives unscripted remarks, and she's hidden from the American media and from the American people, but we know she's a chameleon. She said that she would be our border czar, and yet for 3.5 years, we have an open border. She said that she would bring some common sense and lower inflation to our economic policies, and yet she cast the deciding vote that raised interest rates, raised home prices, and raised food prices. Donald Trump said something very simple, totally inoffensive, but frankly, obviously true to me, which is that Kamala Harris is a chameleon. She's a fake, and the American people have to look at her record if we actually want to know how she stands on the issues, because her words simply can't be trusted. Sir.
How can you fake your race? If
I'm
she's
sorry?
both Indian and black, how can she fake her race?
She fakes who she is depending on the audience that she's in front of, and that's who she is, and that's who she's always been. Well, I smile at a lot of things, including bogus questions from the media, man. I mean, look, I think if you watch a full speech that I give, I actually am having a good time out here, and I'm enjoying this. But look, sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. And right now, I am angry about what Kamala Harris has done to this country and done to the American southern border. And I think that most people in our country, they can be happy-go-lucky sometimes, they can enjoy things sometimes, and they can turn on the news and recognize that what's going on in this country is a disgrace. And if what Kamala Harris has done at the southern border, and if what Kamala Harris has done to raise the price of groceries and housing, if that doesn't bother you, then I think that you don't have a pulse, right? And so, look, I think my message to the American people is very simple on this. Thank you, sir. Ma'am?
Hi, Kimberly Craig, 7 News Detroit. Right here in Shelby Township, there's going to be a mother, a father, a senior citizen struggling to pay their bills, put food on the table, pay the utility bills. When you speak of the prosperity in a Trump administration, speaking to that person, what does that look like?
Well, I think that, you know, I'm 40 years old. I actually just had my 40th birthday, which I'm not too happy about. But I'm 40 years old, and for my entire life, there was this chart that had wages below corporate profits and below the size of government. And there was one 4-year period during my entire life where wages were actually going up, especially for people at the bottom and people at the middle. That was the 4 years when Donald Trump was president. And so my message to people who are struggling is, first of all, I know what it's like to struggle. My mamaw once negotiated with a Meals on Wheels person so that she could get more food from Meals on Wheels so that she could feed me and her. I certainly know what it's like to deal with skyrocketing grocery prices and skyrocketing rent. The solution to it is to give people higher paychecks. The solution to it is to give people better take-home pay. The solution is to unleash American energy so that people aren't going to the grocery and seeing that eggs are 50% more than what they were a year and a half ago, right? You've got to bring down prices to give people basic prosperity. And the way you do that is really unleashing American energy, unleashing American farmers, and not spending like a drunken sailor, which is what Kamala Harris has done during her time in office. We really do know that it's the least of these. The Bible calls them the least of these who have suffered the most under Kamala Harris's affordability crisis. And President Trump and I, that is priority number one, is to make groceries and gas and rent more affordable for normal Americans. If you work hard and play by the rules, this very simple principle should apply. If you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to live a good life in this country. And unfortunately, a lot of people right now are working hard and they're playing by the rules, but they can't afford groceries and they can't afford rent because of bad policy in Washington, D.C. We promise that we're going to change that. One last point I want to make on this, because I don't think that we talk in the media, we don't talk about it enough in politics, but housing is through the roof, and housing is destroying people's savings and their ability to put a good house, put a good roof over their kid's head. So here's the thing. Why is housing so expensive in this country? Housing is so expensive in this country for two reasons. Number one, Kamala Harris pursued policies that raise interest rates, which make mortgages unaffordable for normal Americans. That's number one. And number two, we have let in 20 million illegal aliens who are competing with American citizens for scarce housing. You do those two things and you see the rent crisis that you see in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania. It is a disgrace. President Trump and I promise we will fix it. It's simple public policy. It's just got to be smarter, and it's got to look out for American citizens first.
So Donald Trump just announced J.D. Vance, the Ohio senator, as his vice presidential pick. It's kind of surprising because Vance wasn't always a fan of Trump. In fact, he used to criticize Trump, saying he wasn't the right leader and was taking the working class in a bad direction. But over time, Vance changed his tune, eventually praising Trump as the best president of his lifetime. Vance is young, smart, and willing to do whatever it takes to win, which makes him a strong asset to Trump's campaign, especially when it comes to appealing to undecided voters.
Are you a racist? Do you hate Mexicans?
All you got to do is look in the mirror, JD.
All the bravest and boldest conservatives in the country are behind JD. And the entire MAGA movement is for JD Vance. This is a great person who I've really gotten to know. Yeah, he said some bad things about me, but that was before he knew me, and then he fell in love. Remember I said that about Kim Jong-un. He fell in love, and they said, oh, Trump is saying he fell in love. Actually, he did, if you want to know that.
Now that Donald Trump announced recently elected Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his vice president, let's take a look at his history with Donald Trump.
My fear is, I think Donald Trump is not the right candidate for this group of voters because I think a lot of these grievances are legitimate. But what it's doing is it's giving people an excuse to point the finger at someone else. It's point the finger at Mexican immigrants or Chinese trade or the Democratic elites or whatever else. Fundamentally, what's going on and what Donald Trump has done is change the focus of the white working class from a sort of engaged and constructive politics to a politics of pointing the finger. I'm going to vote third party because I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place.
I agree with you on Trump because I don't think that he's the person. I don't think he actually cares about folks. I think he just recognizes that there was a hole in the conversation, and that hole is that people from these regions of the country, they feel ignored, they feel left out, and they feel very frustrated. And I think, of course, in a lot of ways, they feel that way for totally justifiable reasons. So it's a problem that Trump has been the vessel of a lot of that frustration.
As somebody who doesn't like Trump, myself, the elites were right about Donald Trump, right? I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
He's the best president of my lifetime, and he revealed the corruption in this country like nobody else.
I think that he was a good president. I think he made a lot of good decisions for people.
I take it you're not a Trump supporter from what I've read. Am I right? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I didn't vote for Trump.
All around, he was a great president. I'm 37 years old. Certainly the best president of my lifetime.
One thing they should be doing is thinking seriously about what's wrong in their communities. I think, frankly, that's a big problem with Trump, is that he diagnoses the problems in a very successful, very passionate way, but I don't see him as offering many solutions.
As early as 2016, JD was clearly not a fan of Trump, both publicly and privately, as he was comparing Donald to the big H behind closed doors, while giving some sober analysis on the state of the Republican Party back then. It pretty much does say it all.
I'm not going to be the person who serves as the spokesperson for the Heritage Foundation. I don't have any affiliation. I want to thank especially Kevin Roberts and all of the Heritage Foundation for 50 years of incredible work on conservative policy. If I had been vice president, I would have told the states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, and so many others that we needed to have multiple slates of electors, and I think the U.S. Congress should have fought over it from there. We are living in a banana republic where the president is using his Department of Justice to go after his chief political rival, the person he will appear on the ballot with in about a year. If the Department of Justice will use these nominations for law instead of politics, I am happy to end this hold policy. But so long as the Department of Justice uses its nominations and uses its personnel to go after its political opponents from the President of the United States on down, I will object.
Moments like these are exactly why Trump picked Vance as his VP. Vance, like Trump, is a self-interest kind of guy. He leans into the flip-flop. He has a record of flip-flops. Once he lands on a path to the top, he pursues it with discipline. Analyzing why Trump does certain things, that would require a PhD. I do not have one. Among the reasons Trump picked J.D. Vance over everybody else as his running mate is because he likes having former opposition bow down to him. I mean it. I think he likes to turn people who once hated him into people who he now controls those who at one time expressed the worst for Donald Trump. At the same time, Trump also likes Vance's. That's a key word in the Trump orbit. On a dime to get across the finish line, no matter how it looks, that definitely appeals to Donald Trump. I mean, come on, it reminds you of who Donald Trump is. No more measured loyalty, too, from a guy like Pence. Clearly, Pence and Trump, they would have never gravitated towards each other if not being on the same ticket. They would have never been friends. Trump knows in J.D. Vance, well, he has someone to do his dirty work, to do his bidding proudly. And Vance is new enough as a national politician that Trump doesn't really have to worry about him coming from the Senate fraternity. Yes, J.D. Vance is thought to be extreme in some circles, and he's proven it with some of his rhetoric. But if you really look under the hood, and I mean, you have to look and do a lot of reading. If you do your homework, it's a means to an end for J.D. Vance. It's not technically exactly who he is. It's not his true political identity. but he's willing to play the part. You know, honestly, that may be worse than being a purist. How will J.D. Vance impact the ticket? Well, if you are prone to MAGA world, Vance looks the part, and he's young. He's smart, which isn't necessarily a requirement. He's an Ivy League educated lawyer, and he knows how to behave like a wolf in sheep's clothing. He'll likely...
J.D. Vance ran on the middle of airport to ask Kamala Harris out. He said, "I wanted to check out my future plane and say hello to Kamala Harris, asking why she avoids media questions. I also thought her reporters might be lonely and could use some engagement. I believe in respecting and talking to the media for the American people. I had a bit of fun, even though the vice president didn't wave back as she left."
Senator, did you see the vice president?
Hey guys, how are you?
Good.
I just wanted to check out my future plane, but I also wanted to go say hello to the vice president and ask her why Kamala Harris why does she refuse to answer questions from the media? And I also thought that the press gaggle following her might get a little lonely. I at least have enough respect for you all and for the American people you report to come and talk to you and to answer some questions. And so I thought her reporters might actually benefit from that as well. So had a little bit of fun. I don't think the vice president waved at me as she drove away, but I'm glad to have done it. And I'm glad to be here in Wisconsin actually trying to persuade people to vote for us as opposed to just giving another scripted speech.
We're here because it's important to present a counter-narrative and highlight how her policies have negatively impacted Americans. Despite being the presumptive nominee for 17 days, she hasn't taken real questions from reporters. Defining her is easier than defining Biden because her extreme positions are well documented on video. We have 92 days to tell the truth about Trump delivering peace and prosperity.
You did see the vice president.
I saw her car. I did not see the vice president. The windows are tinted.
Did you get to speak with her? So you didn't get to speak with her?
I did not speak to her. No, I think she was trying to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. But I did speak to a lot of the press gaggle following her.
Do you think it's effective to essentially tail her trail the rest of this week or during this week as well?
Well, clearly we think it's effective because we're here, right? I mean, look, there are 6 or 7 states that are going to decide the entire election. We think it's important to get out there, to talk to people, to make the best case that we can. And obviously there's an element of, especially local media is going to cover her because she's the vice president and the presumptive nominee. So we think it's important to have a counter narrative here, and importantly to drive home this point that she has been a dangerous radical. She has pursued very far left policies, from defunding the police to opening. And I think it's important that the American people actually know that. And again, I really can't believe she's been the presumptive nominee for 17 days and she hasn't taken a real question from reporters.
Did Walter return your phone call?
I'm sorry?
Did the governor return your phone call yesterday?
He actually did, but he left me a voicemail. I think I was on the plane yesterday evening when he called me back. I haven't talked to him since.
Harder to define than President Biden?
No, I think I think Kamala Harris is easier to define because President Biden, because there's so many absurd video clips of her. I wanted to defund the police. She said, I want to give Medicare to illegal aliens. She said that she wanted to decriminalize all illegal immigration, and it's on video. So defining her is not hard, but that is the work of a campaign, right? We've got 92 days to tell the truth that Donald Trump delivered peace and prosperity, the truth that Kamala Harris has delivered an open border and rising prices. It's not a hard case to make, but it's why we do what we do.
Distracting, and there's been comments made that Republicans should focus on things like immigration and crime and the border. I'm curious what you say to critics who are worried that Trump is sort of getting out there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anybody who could listen to President Trump over the last couple of weeks and say that he's not talking about immigration or crime or the fact that Kamala Harris's policies led to rising inflation. He's talking about all that stuff, but one of the reasons why he's been both an effective president, but a guy that a lot of Americans identify with is, yeah, he's going to tell some jokes. He's going to mix it up from time to time. He's not going to be a boring staid American politician. He's going to be who he actually is, and I think that's the source of the success. But look, if you listen to what President Trump is saying, he is really prosecuting the case on Kamala Harris led to the open border. Kamala Harris cast the tie-breaking vote that led to skyrocketing inflation. Kamala Harris cast the tie-breaking vote. And I think President Trump's been very on message, not just the past couple of weeks, the past couple of years.
I want to ask you about your law and order message this morning, but just to follow up, what was the message from Walls on voicemail? What was the message from Governor Walz?
Oh, I see. Well, no, I called him to congratulate him either yesterday or the day before. Sorry, time's moving.
Yeah. But he called you
yesterday, and then he just called me back. Yeah.
Did he leave a message?
Yeah, it was just, hey, thanks for calling. Appreciate it. Look forward to the debate, etc.
This morning you were talking about law and order, the policy decisions. I wanted to ask you about some comments you made a couple of years ago about when Trump wins, that he should get rid of all of the staff in Washington, replace them with all of our own guys, right?
Yeah.
The Andrew Jackson stuff, and then the judges rule, let them enforce it. Can you elaborate on that? Were you really talking about blatantly defying a court ruling?
I think it's about democratic accountability. I mean, look, the Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution says the president is the commander-in-chief. If, say, for example, a military general doesn't listen to the president of the United States, the president has to be able to fire that person. And that is core to what the president is able to do, and that's core to our entire constitutional system. What I said then, and I would say now, is one of the problems with the first Trump administration is you did have bureaucrats who didn't listen to the people's elected president. That has to change in a second Trump administration. And look, I think you have to be willing to fire people who disobey the president of the United States. If you can't, the president isn't in charge of the government, the people aren't in charge of the government, then the bureaucrats are, and that's something I want to get rid of.
The question is not really about whether to fire people, the question is about whether, if that was blocked by them, do you think that...
No, what I said is in the hypothetical where you have something core to the president's Article 2 functions, where he is trying to fire a person in his own government, he has to be able to do that, and if the courts tried to stop him, that would actually be a constitutional crisis instigated by the courts. I don't think they would do that, though. I think most justices, most judges, even those on the left recognize the president has to be able to control who works for him in government.
Trump has spoken several times calling Kamala Harris Kamala.
Yeah, I saw that.
Do you know what that's about, and are you going to start calling her that too?
I haven't talked to him about it. I'm not planning on calling her Kamala blah. I actually talked to the president yesterday, but we didn't talk about that. Look, I think the president, obviously, he loves to give people nicknames, and I think that he's going to keep on doing that. I would be shocked if it's the last nickname he gives her before the end of the election.
Senator, $36 million raised in 24 hours is what the Harris campaign is saying since Walz has announced.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that?
Look, I mean, obviously, Democrats are going to raise a lot of money because they stand up for Wall Street, they stand up for the big banks, and I'm not shocked that you're going to have a lot of big money donors coming in for the Kamala Harris campaign. She was their preferred candidate. Remember, she was the candidate who encouraged and supported NAFTA. She wasn't in there when it was initially enacted, but she continued to reauthorize it and support it. That led to the decimation of a lot of manufacturing jobs, but it also made a lot of people in this country rich. So I'm not surprised that those people who benefited from her policies money. I think the question is, most Americans have not benefited from her policies. They're not going to give her vote.
I just want to ask about your accusation this morning about Walz, about the abandoning his fellow soldiers.
Yeah.
Are you basing that on anything more than a Facebook post? And how do you feel about? I mean, these has faced similar accusations about avoiding service because of bone spurs. Do you think that is accurate and fair to for Trump to face?
Well, look, the difference, Mike, between what President Trump has said and done and what Walz has said and done is that President Trump didn't lie, right? President Trump did not serve in the United States military. He's never claimed that he did. Say on camera that I carried a gun in a war. Well, which war did you carry a gun in? Because you apparently never went to a war zone. That is a totally reasonable question to ask, and I think the evidence at this point is overwhelming that he lied about serving in a combat zone. By the way, I served in a combat zone. I answered the call. I've never lied about my military service. He clearly has. There was another quote I actually just saw a couple of hours ago where he apparently said that he fought in Iraq, or at least a journalist reported that he said he fought in Iraq. Well, if he said that, that is a lie, and we have to be willing to call people out. Lying about your military service in order to procure political points, that's really disgraceful conduct. It's a disgrace to millions of American veterans, and I think it's totally reasonable to call them out on it.
In Iraq?
While in Eau Claire, J.D. Vance criticized Kamala Harris, saying she changes her positions and pretends to be tough on crime, while wanting to defund the police. He also pointed out her role as the border czar and accused her of avoiding media questions, calling it disgraceful and insulting to Americans. Vance took questions from reporters and expressed his readiness to debate Governor Tim Walz, emphasizing that the American people deserve to see those aiming for vice president stand and persuade them. He voiced frustration with Harris's campaign approach.
Cross-programming started on the tarmac.
Indiana, a war of words before either event started. Vance came to reporters covering Air Force Two's arrival just minutes after Harris deplaned.
Every single position she has changed. She
She pretends to be a prosecutor. She pretends to be a tough on crime prosecutor, and yet here she is wanting to defund the police. She's the border czar, yet she's opened up the American southern border. This is a person who has to answer the questions from the media, and it's disgraceful that she runs for you guys. It's also insulting to the American people.
Vance, later speaking at an airport equipment manufacturer, took from reporters. He's also fired back at Harris. He says the pair need to be tougher on crime and border policies.
I want to debate Governor Walz because nothing to do with Governor Walz, but because the American people deserve to see the people who want to be their vice president stand before them and try to persuade them. And it's one of the things that's really frustrated me about Kamala's campaign is that she seems totally uninterested in actually talking to American voters.
James, Vance is coming to the same cities as Harris and Walz.
The counter-programming not just in Wisconsin, Deanna. Both were in Pennsylvania yesterday. Oak today. Harris and Walz later traveling to Detroit. That's where Vance was this morning.
All right, James Stratton reporting.